tribes. Okay, very important are these 7 Magyar tribes. His great-great-great-grandson was the first who Christianized the Hungarians. Okay, so you also get to learn about Saint Stephen or King Stephen. So King Stephen I in the year 1000, he was the first king that Christianized the people here in Hungary and started their relationship with the Holy Roman Empire. Of course, the Holy Roman Empire was established 200 years earlier. So this Central European region, Hungary is a Central European country. A lot of people will say it's Eastern European. I mean, it's definitely east of West Europe, but it's Central European, a landlocked country. So it's really been in the heart of where the Holy Roman Empire was positioned. Okay, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Poland were all part of this were all incorporated into this Holy Roman Empire. And the Arpad dynasty was associated with this, but the Arpad dynasty basically all petered out in the 14th century because there was no male heir. But before that, like we saw yesterday in Slovenia and Croatia, there's a lot of different people trying to take land here. So in the 13th century, in the 1200s, we had invasions from the Mongols. Okay, so the Mongols came, caused a lot of havoc. The Arpad dynasty died out. There was no male heir. We see that it changes hands, and we have different rulers who are ruling over this area. In fact, it's a very turbulent period. We see the Ottomans coming up from the south and trying to take land for themselves. We see lots of different people fighting over this Hungarian land, and I'm sure Natasha will talk about this on our city tour. It was felt like for Hungarians or for Magyars that it was just constant changing of who was controlling them. Okay, so there was a big war. It was called the Battle of Mohacs, which was in the 17th century, and this is where Hungary, as we know it today, was really divided up into three sections. So it was divided into the Habsburg dynasty. They were able to take a big portion, so based from Austria. One section was Ottomans. Then a small section in the south was actually where the Magyars or the Hungarians were living. So it was divided into 3. In 1699, Leopold I of the Habsburgs was able to finally push the Ottomans out of Hungary. But what that meant was then they fell under complete Habsburg control. So although they got rid of one of their enemies, they basically had another enemy which came into the fold. So at the turn of the century, in the 18th century, early 1700s, we saw a lot of fighting, which was the Wars of Independence, the Hungarian Wars of Independence, trying to get their country back for themselves. But for a lot of these battles, they were unsuccessful. However, they were able to slowly push the Habsburgs out, but not entirely. In fact, it'll come to a stage where in 1867, there's an agreement made from the Habsburgs that they're going to make a dual monarchy, because there was years and years and years of fighting that decided to make it a dual monarchy. So what we have is now the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which was a massive, massive empire. To give you an idea, parts of Austria, parts of Germany, Poland, Slovenia, down into Romania, Bulgaria, was all part of this Austro-Hungarian Empire. So it was massive. It was very, very big. But of course, this Austro-Hungarian Empire will be thrown into war when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in 1914. And after the First World War, it'll be all over. So this dynasty will end. There was a treaty which was signed in 1920. It's called the Treaty of Trianon, and the treaty saw Hungarians lose 2/3 of their land and about 1/3 of their ethnic population. It also saw, the Treaty of Versailles, which was the year earlier, also saw Germany lose a lot of their land and a lot of their ethnic population. So we fast forward a little bit, we have a guy called Admiral Horthy, who was in charge, or he was very high up politically in Hungary, and he starts to align himself more with Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler is talking about living space and talking about regaining this land that they'd lost in these treaties, which were quite detrimental to countries like Germany or countries like Hungary. So they were talking about taking this land back, getting the land of where they believed their ethnic population was. And this all happened in 1938. So a year before the war, the Second World War began with the invasion of Poland, there was something known as the Munich Agreement. And we can look back at this now and realize how ridiculous it was. It was a terrible decision, but the world leaders, the President of France, the Prime Minister of England, the leader of Italy, Mussolini, Hitler, so the leader of the Nazi Germans, all met in Munich. And this is where they were trying to avoid another war. The First World War was pretty horrendous. They didn't want to go back to war. And Hitler was saying, well, I want this space, which was in the Czech Republic, because these are 80% ethnically German. This is our space. This is our land. And so the world leaders agreed to give that land to Adolf Hitler against any talk with Czechoslovakia, because it was Czechoslovakia then. They basically cut a big section of Czechoslovakia off and gave it to Germany. But that set a precedent. That meant that other countries were like, well, if they're going to allow Germany to take a big section of land with no issues, we're going to take a section. So Hungary was happy that they were able to take a portion of land which they believed was theirs in what was now Czechoslovakia. So this was a precedent to what would later be the Second World War. They were allowing people to take sections of land because they believed it was theirs. This will lead to Adolf Hitler invading Poland because he believed at least that western part of Poland was ethnically German. So the Treaty of Munich, or the Munich Agreement as it was known, was a terrible agreement, but it was an agreement that was made because they were trying to avoid war at all costs. All it did was it basically set the precedent for the war. So Hungary were able to take extra portions of land, and they aligned themselves and they formed an alliance with Germany. So when the war broke out in 1939, they were involved in the fighting. The Hungarians, in fact, had a lot of forces in 1941 on the eastern front, where they saw great losses. They saw massive losses because they were the frontline fighters. It wasn't the German soldiers, it was the Hungarian soldiers. So as the war progressed and as the Nazis were starting to see that the tide was turning and they were starting to lose more and more battles and it was looking like they were going to lose the war, the Hungarians actually decided that they wanted to sever that allegiance that they had with Germany. But of course, the Nazis didn't like that at all. So the Nazis invaded Hungary in 1944, and it was under Nazi control, despite they were allies at the start of the war. Now, following the invasion of Hungary, it was only 1 year later that the war was over, with the liberation by the USSR. And what that meant was Hungary then came into a communist state. Europe was divided into two. Winston Churchill will famously say that it was divided by an iron curtain. So anything in Eastern Europe was communist. It would later join what was known as the Warsaw Pact. Anything in Western Europe was communist, and that was what we now call, or they formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So 1945, communist rule. Communism is a fantastic concept on paper, okay? Communism does work in small places, okay? There's places where communism is still active, like in small villages or tribes where you've got a population of 1,000 and it works. When you're talking about millions of people, communism doesn't work very well. So what is communism? The Communist Manifesto was written many years earlier than 1945. But the idea was everyone is equal. So everyone has the same opportunities, everyone has the same pay, everyone gets the same food, the same car, everything. There's no religion in the communist world, and you cannot talk out against the communist regime. So what that meant was if you're a doctor and you've trained for 10 years, you've done your masters, you've spent all that money studying, you're making $250,000 a year. Obviously these figures don't make sense with those times, but let's just keep it simple. You're making $250,000 a year, or you're a cleaner. You haven't done any formal training, you haven't spent any money for the education, and you're making $50,000 a year, okay? All of a sudden, everyone gets $120,000 a year, okay? The cleaner gets the same amount as the doctor the doctor gets the same amount as the cleaner, okay? So it's a good concept that everyone's equal, but then for people that feel that they've contributed more, or they contribute more to society, or they've got more skills than one another, it means that they wanted to leave. And this is what we saw a lot happening in the communist world. A lot of people started to leave the communist world that were highly educated because there was better opportunities in the West. The other issue with that was if you spoke out against the state, or you spoke out against the system, then you would be punished, you would be imprisoned, you'd be tortured, and potentially you would be murdered, okay? And this is exactly what happened all across the communist world. There was secret police, there was tapping of phones, so you couldn't speak out in public, or even in private, of fear that you would be killed. You couldn't practice your religion if you were religious. For instance, I'm sure Natasha will talk about this, Hungary was damaged during the war, and like many places, many churches across Europe in the communist bloc, they were left unbuilt. They were left in rubble until communism fell, because churches weren't accepted. There was still, of course, secret religious events happening, but you couldn't publicly go into a church. So for a lot of people, this took away a lot of their identity, you know. For them, religion was so important. So there was a guy called Imre Nagy, and he was this leader who was really trying to fight for more independence, to have a more relaxed version of communism in Hungary. And this is what they call the Hungarian Uprising. So in 1956, Imre Nagy leads this charge where lots of people take to the streets and they take the Hungarian flag, which had an emblem in the middle, which was a communist emblem. They cut the communist emblem out the middle and wave the flag in a show of force saying, or a show of protest saying, we don't want communism here anymore. Unfortunately for Imre Nagy, very, very popular with Hungarian people, very unpopular with the communist USSR or Russia. And he was imprisoned, he was tortured, and in 1959 he was executed, so he lost his life. But what will happen is it will lead years later to the movement where communism will fall. So we're talking late 1980s, 1990s is when we start to see communism in Eastern Europe begin to fall and coming into more modern times. So today, Hungary still is a much smaller country than what it once was. As I say, it lost 2/3 of its land and 1/3 of its population. And still to this day, there's areas or regions that are disputed. For instance, one of those regions is Transylvania, disputed between Romania and Hungary. But because they're trying to grow back to what they once were, they were very proud, one of the most powerful nations in Europe. They've got some pretty interesting laws. So, for instance, if you are a Hungarian and you have a child, you then get a tax deduction. If you have 3 children, you do not pay tax, okay? For the rest of your life, if you've got 3 children, you have no tax. This is a way that they're trying to increase their population. So 1 child, tax deduction, 2nd child, tax deduction, 3rd child, no tax. Likewise, for each child that you have, you get a loan from the government, an interest-free loan. If you have the 3 children, that loan paper is ripped up. That's free money, yep, and it's substantial. It's something like 20 or 30,000 euros per child. So a lot of people now, a lot of young people are trying, you know, having more children to try to grow the population up to make Hungary more stronger like it once was, okay? Some people that have Hungarian heritage that you probably, you know, you've heard of, but you don't know, William Fox was Hungarian. So if you've ever heard of 20th Century Fox, or now it's 21st Century Fox, so the big movie production company, William Fox, Hungarian. The most famous magician in the world. Who do you think the most famous magician? Houdini. Yep, Hungarian. If you want to go to like ancestry of people who have Hungarian ancestry, Alanis Morissette, grandparents. Parents. Gene Simmons, parents. There's a long list of a lot of famous people that have Hungarian heritage, which goes to show how big the kingdom once was. In fact, Hungary, of countries, has a very strong sporting history, and for every country in the world that has competed in the Olympics, Hungary has the highest medal tally of any country that hasn't hosted the Olympics. In fact, in the very, very first Olympics, modern Olympics, in 1896, it was a Hungarian who won the first gold medal. It was a swimmer. Now, what's ironic about that? Hungary doesn't have a coast. Okay, so it's a landlocked country, there's no coast, and in 1896 there was no swimming pools like we have in the Olympics now. What they did is they took them on a little boat and they dropped them off out in the ocean, and then they swam to the shore. Now, this guy who won the very first gold medal, he had the nickname the Dolphin. His father died when he was a child when he drowned in the River Danube. And it was from that point that he wanted to teach himself how to swim so he wouldn't have the same fate as his father. And he became the first gold medalist. In fact, we've got a lot of very famous gold medalists from Hungary, including a boxer. There was a boxer called Laszlo Paplo or something like that.
Laszlo Pap. He trained my dad.
He trained your dad?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Laszlo Pap.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for helping me. I didn't expect anyone would know. Okay, so this is even better that I can talk about that. So he was incredible. He won 3 Olympic gold medals. His professional tally was 27 wins, 2 no contests. He never lost in his professional career. In his amateur career, he had 55 first round knockouts. He was incredible. He was like, that's so fun that your dad was trained by Laszlo. Wow, fantastic. So boxing, water sports, water polo is quite popular in Hungary, actually very popular in Hungary, and they're very good at water polo. There was a guy called Oliver Halassi, and he had an injury. He lost his leg from just below his knee. It was amputated on his, well, I've got my right leg there, but it was his left leg that was amputated from below the knee. And he competed in the water polo team for Hungary. And they won several gold medals at the Olympics. He was their star player despite missing half of his leg. There was one day where he competed in a European championship. He won the championship, and then only an hour or so later, he went to a swimming competition where he did a 1500 meter swim, European championship, and he won. So this guy had just competed in water polo and then won the 1500 meter Euro championship, and that was despite having half of the leg. There was no Paralympics in those days. In fact, he holds 22 national records still to this day for swimming. So, very successful swimmer, won gold medals for swimming. Fencing, there was a 1936 Olympics, of course, was held in Berlin, and this was a very controversial Olympics because this was where the Nuremberg naming laws had taken effect. So any German that had Jewish heritage was seen as non-German and wasn't allowed to compete. There was a Hungarian fencer who won a gold medal in the 1936 for fencing Olympics. Very, very strong sporting history. In the 1950s, obviously that was very boring. In the 1950s, there was what they called the Magnificent Magyars, and this was, according to BBC in 2016, the greatest football team that was ever assembled. So the Magnificent Magyars between 1950 and 1956 lost 1 game of football. The national team lost 1 game of football. That 1 game that they lost was the 1954 FIFA World Cup final. They lost to Germany. Hungary have never won the World Cup, the FIFA World Cup, and that was despite having on what BBC claimed was the greatest team ever assembled. So they were just dominating for a 6-year period. They won the Olympics, but they didn't win the FIFA World Cup. So a very, very strong sporting history. But it's not just their sporting history, it's a lot of other things that we use on a day-to-day basis that we can thank Hungarians for. A biro pen, okay? Biro takes the name from Laszlo Biro, okay? He was the man that invented the pen that we use all around the world to this day. The Rubik's Cube was invented here. The guy's name was Rubik. The Pulitzer Prize comes from Hungary. There's a lot that Hungary has really brought into this world that we probably don't necessarily associate with Hungary. A lot of famous people, a big sporting history, a lot of inventions. So hopefully that when we're in Hungary for the one night that we have here, and when we're going around Budapest today, it will make a little bit more sense, and you'll start to look at things and go, oh, that's why there's Rubik's Cubes everywhere, that's why there's paprika everywhere, or whatnot. But as I say, we're going to have Natasha, who will be our local guide. We're going to have 2 hours with her. She's going to talk non-stop. Well, we're actually going to have 3.5 hours with her if you're doing the Danube River Cruise. So you're going to get a lot more information, more specific to Budapest when we're there, okay? But for now, we've got about an hour and a half drive from here through to the city. What I'm going to do is, if there was anyone that still owed any money for the river cruise, I'm going to come and collect that money now. So it was €60 for the river cruise for tonight, okay?